So paradigm of knowledge as information is exactly what's cutting us off from reality. And so if you take as your paradigm of knowing face-to-face, intimate encounter, which I do in loving to know, the words subjective and objective don't pertain. I mean, it's all of you and it's all of reality.
Let's talk about uncertainty as we grow intellectually and spiritually. Back when I was a university student, I went through a crisis of faith. I'd grown up as a Christian, but I found myself wrestling with whether God was really there or whether the universe was indeed, as Richard Dawkins claimed, a place of blind, pitiless indifference. But deeper than the specifics of the Christian atheist debate, I had a deep sense of uncertainty. How could I be confident of anything at all? How could I know that I knew? I thought that if only I could gather enough information and data and evidence, maybe I could be certain, but that seemed impossible. Now, in time, I found a way to escape the trap of radical uncertainty and to find a way of rebuilding and reintegrating my sense of reason and faith. But I might have got there a lot quicker and with a lot less anguish along the way if I'd known and discovered the works of Esther Meek, a philosopher who has thought deeply about the question of what it means to know. And in her books, she challenges the assumption that knowledge is a matter of information gathering, of mere data, and argues for a view of knowing and of understanding that is personal and participatory, something more akin to art and artful discovery. Art and knowing are the same thing. So having met Esther last summer at Hutchmoot UK and at L'Abri Fellowship, I was delighted that she agreed to come and chat with me on the podcast. So I hope you'll find this an interesting and illuminating conversation. Thanks for listening. Okay, so welcome to the Imaginative Discipleship Podcast. I'm Caleb Woodbridge, and I'm really excited to welcome Esther Lightcap Meek, who is Professor of Philosophy Emeritus at Geneva College and author of several wonderful books, including Longing to Know, Loving to Know, A Little Manual of Knowing, and recently Doorway to Artistry. And that's the book I've been reading recently and very much appreciating. And in that, Esther describes her life quest as, can we make contact with reality? And I'm delighted that Esther's agreed to chat to me about her book and about how artful knowing can help us. Welcome, Esther.
Thank you, Caleb. It's very good to see you again. England is always in my thoughts.
England and Wales. I'm in Wales, which
Right.
is
Wales.
Is its own country as well. So yes, wonderful.
So I as you know, I read King Arthur stories and listen to Malcolm Guite and look at my pictures and so I'm always pursuing that. I'm also reading Richard Hooker. So
very good.
That must be. I ought to rise to that.
I'm very excited for Malcolm Guite's Arthuriad. That's something I'm looking forward to. Oh, I enjoyed your recent appearance on Grail Country YouTube channel. So I'd recommend that to my own listeners and viewers. If you want more conversation with Esther, then that's a good one to explore. Yeah, do you want to just say a bit about yourself and what drew you to being a philosopher, and how did you end up with this sort of life quest?
One may well ask. Well, I was born into a Bible-believing family and church. And when I was around 13, I found myself with very odd questions, which I thought were sin. One was, how do I know that God exists? And the other is, how do I know that anything exists outside my mind? And I know they seemed crazy, especially the second one, which seemed the more important one to me. But it just seemed to me I had no proof, and it was like one could not live unless one had proof for that. So That it took me a few years from that point. You'll appreciate this, Caleb. When I was in high school, my mother was working in a Christian bookstore and read all the new books, and that included Francis Schaeffer.
Ah,
And
yes.
I followed her red pencil underlinings through The God Who Is There. Thank you very much. And that was when I realized my questions weren't sin, they were philosophical. And that responses to them had shaped whole cultural epochs across the disciplines, which fired my imagination for interdisciplinary studies. Still didn't know you could study philosophy. When I found out that you could, I changed my life in 12 hours to pursue that. So that was how it started. And I haven't looked back. So also, I guess something distinctive about me is because I found my way to the work of this premier scientist turned philosopher, Michael Polanyi, who ended his life actually in Oxford. I got to see his house when I was there last year. At Merton, I began to see that started to put things together for me in terms of, I realized my questions had to do with knowing, and his approach to knowing is what I needed. And also allowed me a vision of philosophizing as the sort of thing one does for ordinary people, because we're all philosophical. And so early on, I just, by the time I was figuring these things out, I had very small children, you know, life wasn't desperate, but I thought of kitchen table philosophy, and it still just seems to me that you can't, to me, philosophy was the most important thing to do because the questions were so fundamental to every step you took, every single thing. And it wasn't just that way for, certain academics in an ivory tower, but for every single person, because the one thing you need to be philosophical is to have been born. To be human is to be philosophical. So that's kind of set me up as a very odd writer of philosophy for as many people as I can, make it accessible to. And I have to say quite humbly, I never thought I was brilliant. And so I had to kind of dumb it down so I could understand it. So, it's not like, condescension. This was desperation. So that's what I'm up.
Yes, well, there's a wonderful warmth to your writing. It's very hospitable in a wonderful way, and the book Doorway to Artistry is structured around your house, and that's a really
in which I cast was the workshop.
Yeah, so yeah, I really appreciate that. I think it is very easy to engage with, and I guess people can be scared off by philosophy, but I think one of the things, just for me, thinking about discipleship, a really important part of my journey as a Christian was just having to develop that confidence that what I was believing, that I could believe it. And I think similar to you, I had a bit of a similar crisis of how can I know this is true in terms of my Christian faith, but how can I know anything with any degree of confidence? And I went to university and was studying English and history. It was very postmodern, and there was a lot of this doubt and skepticism, and so I had to process that. Yeah. So in Doorway to Artistry, a big foil that you have, as it were, is modernist epistemology, a modernist way of understanding how we know things, how we look at the world. For people who might not understand, may not have heard that term, but what is that, and what problems does it create in terms of some of the air we breathe and assumptions we've soaked up from the last few hundred years of philosophical thought?
Well, first of all, epistemology means study of knowledge, which is one of the big areas in philosophy. And whether you've studied it or not, you've got some presumptions about how you know. And because I'm interested in everyday people in the streets, I'm kind of more interested in what your neighbor would presume, what the implicit presumptions are that everybody has. And so I pose that if you were to ask your neighbor, they would probably say knowledge is information. And we do live in what's called the information age, and we just presume that's what it is, and our job is to collect it until we have it comprehensible. So that's pretty much the idea that I'm working to expose and criticize. But you can see that kind of view as endemic in what you could call modernity, which you could see as 1600s to the present and only growing stronger. And there's, lots of people that are way more scholarly in that area than I am, but that's kind of our legacy. So what I found was not only did I have weird problems, everybody had weird problems.
Yeah.
Kind of means I'll never run out of a job because we all do kind of inhale it. And if you haven't inhaled it, it might happen like around third grade, it just something that just comes to us at that point. So I see myself as doing what I call epistemological therapy. I don't mean psychological stuff, but I mean that what we have to expose and address are things that we haven't even noticed. And you can't, if knowledge is information is the defective paradigm, adding information is not going to correct paradigm. It's not going to correct our wearing of that paradigm. So you have to do something that's more bodied and that actually brings change. So that's what I see myself as doing.
Yeah. So it's very much seeing stuff as data in a reductive way. Sort of it's stuff we can use. It's our mastery over the world. It's breaking it down into little bits.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, we privilege the bits. We privilege analysis, getting down to the bottom. The other thing that characterizes this is all these binaries, these either or. So subjective, objective, fact, value, reason, imagination, reason, faith. All those are binaries that are endemic to the defective paradigm. So we say, yay, facts, boo, value. Yay, reason, boo, emotion. Yay and boo are profound philosophical evaluative terms. Very well. So, yay, science, boo, art. And the problem is not that you need less of this and more of this. You have to torpedo that dichotomy. And that's what I found Michael Polanyi alone helped me do. So
how have you found Polanyi so instructive in terms of finding a better way of approaching these things, of torpedoing that way of thinking?
Question, thank you for asking. I'll do this short, but I hope you think about your life and live it out because I want to haunt you with it. So Michael Polanyi, the premier scientific discoverer, said if knowledge is information, no scientific discovery could ever happen. But it does. And he said, look, it's not the scientific method. Even verification is artistry. Because it's a highly creative act. So what he said is that all knowing, and I lay this out the most fully in Longing to Know, which is my first. It's a book for people considering Christianity who have questions about knowing. And it says, look, all knowing works this way. And, once you fix your view of knowing and then return to the question of whether you can know God, you've solved a lot of the problems. So you got to think about your golf game for a while, or frisbee throwing, or bike riding, that sort of thing. So what Polanyi posed is that all knowing is has two levels, two connected levels. One is subsidiary and one is focal. You rely on the subsidiary to integrate to spy or shape a pattern, which is focal. And that pattern does not reduce to the clues. This is not a linear process. It's kind of a backward lurching. So you have to turn around and look back. And so that moment of insight, the aha moment, is the moment in which the things you were subsidiarily scrabbling, groping from open up to the pattern and that then transforms the clue. Great example is learning to read. So there's the point, in kindergarten or wherever, that you have to learn to identify the letters and identify the words, and you're focused on the text. And I taught all my children to read and took a picture when I handed them their first book. What I got was pictures of, because at that moment they realized they were following all the rules, but all of a sudden they were reading.
Yeah.
How all meaning works. All meaning works that way. You've got this from, to, subsidiary, focal integration. And what happens is, before the aha moment, you're focused on what you need to come to subsidiarily indwell. And when you're focused on it, you are blind to reality. Right? So paradigm of knowledge as information is exactly what's cutting us off from reality. Because if you fixate on what your thumb is doing when you're doing scales on the piano, the whole thing's going to grind to a halt. Right? So, but what you need to do is subsidiarily indwell it, attend from it, to pursue and shape and submit to a pattern. And it's that process from to subsidiary focal integration that makes contact with reality and puts us in communion with it. So the word subsidiary is really, really helpful.
That's really, really helpful. It's when something comes together and you're like, oh, I'm not just focused on the how, I'm sort of getting on and it's taking me somewhere. So it's like riding a bike when you stop having to think about sort of all the pedaling and stuff, and you can just focus on, oh, I'm doing it. I'm in control.
Right.
I can enjoy the ride.
You don't leave it behind, but you bodily indwell it. So your body subsidiarily indwells and you attend from it. You can't forget the subsidiaries.
Yeah.
And you can actually, that's the area of artistry. So as you grow your skill, then you can become virtuoso, but it's all subsidiary. It's all subsidiary. And yes, you can temporarily revert to train it. Polanyi called that destructive analysis. But the point is, you're not meant to dwell there, because if you do, you lose the pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. It's when so things like really honing your craft, that takes effort over time. But when you've really learned it, you're able to enter more of that sort of flow, creative flow of, you've got all that habituated into you, so you can work in a much more creative way. It allows you to step forward.
Right. There's a risk to destructive analysis. I had one student give a presentation on Polanyi, and he said about himself that he was a diver. And he said that he could do one of those very complex dives that looks like a pretzel, until the day his coach said to him, pull your elbow around a little bit faster. Well, he could never do the dive again. So that's the risk of reverting to focus on what you need to be relying on. The other thing I wanted to point out is the word clue, which we all use, right? Well, what is a clue? Well, a clue is a half understanding. And so what you have to do is actually entrust yourself to these items that are pregnant with more meaning than you could say. And
Hmm.
that's how you navigate toward a discovery, Polanyi said. Again, it's not the scientific method. It's not even the scientific method for verification. You have to
Yeah.
anticipatively, hope, subsidiarily, and this is how he uses the word imagination. At the heart of all
Mm.
knowing is the subsidiary from creative scrabbling, ransacking for clues in search of a half understood, half shining vision. That's intuition. This is subsidiary imagination. All knowing takes that place. There are not ways of knowing. There is one way of knowing, and it's subsidiary focal
Mm.
integration.
Yeah, no, that seems to me really helpful. I think one of the ideas that I'd got into my head was this idea of objectivity, and that in order to know whether God was real or not, I had to look at that in some kind of really objective way that was dispassionate and kind of disembodied and depersonalized. And I think one of the things that was helpful for me was realizing that the idea of actually when we love something, when we care about something, that's often when we're best able to know it and to draw out a real
Right.
understanding of it. My father-in-law is really into mosses. I don't get the fascination, but I love that he sees something interesting and beautiful there and gives it the attention to be able to then see those fine differences and to go, oh, that's a really interesting one. That's unusual. You wouldn't find that here because, and so on. And I was on a walk, a forest church thing that someone had organized, and there was a forester who's knows all about trees and so is able to just point out all of these things about where we were walking. And it was really lovely, just that depth of knowledge that comes from having a passion for something. Can you speak to that? Maybe the connection between attention and love and knowledge.
At the beginning of Polanyi's magnum opus, Personal Knowledge, he starts by criticizing science's false ideal of objectivity, which is, as you just described it, a dispassionate, and so object means no, check your emotions at the door, no emotions, that sort of thing. Whereas for him as a scientist, he was saying, look, passion is the heart of it. So it was growing out of that I named the books first Longing to Know and then Loving to Know. And I think it's just very helpful. I've gone on to augment Polanyi's, I'll always be committed to subsidiary focal integration. I mean, that's the idea that just dispels modernity. But also, I've gone on to say that in that aha moment, it's like a face-to-face encounter.
Mm.
And so if you take as your paradigm of knowing face-to-face intimate encounter, which I do in Loving to Know, the words subjective and objective don't pertain. I mean, it's all of you and it's all of reality. So, and that's more objective than the false ideal of objectivity. So to be interpersoned, it's knowing a reality like your wife that you half understand. That's more, an intimacy with reality. It's like this
Mm.
known history. And, when reality can surprise you, right? That that's a way more three-dimensional sort of objectivity. So I think, and another philosopher that I've found in recent years, and I'm a fangirl of, is D.C. Schindler. And
Hmm.
he, like me, defines knowing as intimate communion with reality, which that's way encounter. There's not anything more three-dimensional than encounter.
Hmm.
So, and that means the medium of that is love. So intimacy presumes love. And it is this kind of embracive It's a whole different dynamic than collecting information. So that's why, I talk in Longing to Know about this, but Annie Dillard says, it's the lovers who see. It's the lovers who see. And then I do talk about authoritative guides. Well, they would be the lovers too. And they actually teach us to see what is there, right? So like your forester, you saw all kinds of things that you never saw before. Well, he wasn't making them up, right? He was pointing them out because he was an authoritative guide. So, and all knowing works that way. For me as a Bible believing Christian, that made sense of this odd thing that Christians seem to do, which is believing the Bible to tell them about something I don't see. Well, how's that different from an X-ray radiologist
Mm-hmm.
who I go
Yeah.
to just to show me what I didn't see?
Yes. Yeah. So I think, obviously, in terms of the Christian thing, the role of revelation with a capital R is really important in that we have God speaking to us, and you have to start from that position of trust, and then you find that, oh yes, this is making sense of reality. You have that encounter, and it proves real as you go along. But that's not particularly unusual. We have to do that all the time in terms of knowledge. There's just in terms of how we relate to people and how we rely on small r revelation in terms of people telling us stuff, and in terms of how we trust reality to be disclosing something genuine to us as we encounter it. And if you don't start with that posture, you can't really get anywhere. You're stuck in that wasteland of, oh, how can I know anything is true?
Well, one thing that came to mind listening to you is I have also grown, and this maybe segues to Doorway to Artistry, in my sense of wonder at reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing that we've got besides a defective modernist epistemology is a defective, yea, absent modernist metaphysic. And so to see, like in Doorway to Artistry, I talk about the lively real. And I work with Rowan Wood's idea that reality, is more. It's more than it is. To be a thing is to be more than it is. And so and the Thomas's idea of essay or existence, the act of being, which is the let there be, makes every atom and every second of this world absolutely a stunning wonder. And that's just ordinary stuff. I mean, this is ordinary creative stuff. That's, you don't need any kind of religious baptism. It's amazing. Of this world, absolutely a stunning wonder. And that's just ordinary stuff. I mean, this is ordinary creative stuff. That's, you don't need any kind of religious baptism. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. I love the line in the book Sophie's World by Justin Garder, which I read years ago, but I don't know if it was original to him or whether he got it from somewhere else. But the only thing you need to be a good philosopher is a sense of wonder.
Well, and people quote Aristotle and say philosophy begins with wonder, but what he meant was it's rooted in it. So you never get away from the wonder. And that's again, a difficulty with modernity is they left the wonder behind.
So there's quite a lot of talk at the moment around the idea of re-enchantment or perceiving the world as enchanted again. Do you think that's a helpful way of thinking about the sort of lively real? Or I think on the Grail Country discussion, you were a bit ambivalent about that framing. What do you think's a helpful way of understanding the lively real? How would you say we cultivate a healthy perception of the world in that sort of way?
Well, that I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk to you about that. And I've been thinking a lot about it. I'm a little concerned about the word re-enchantment. I think the lively real is a good way to understand it. But what I fear is because lots of people have not done philosophy and they just put the baggage of modernity. So you've got, the religious and the non-religious, you've got reason, you got faith, that kind of thing. That's I talk about a daisy of dichotomies. That's daisy thinking in Loving to Know. So it's these divorces, and I want to say no. There's not two ways of knowing. There's one way of knowing, and embedded in the heart of whatever you call science and reason is imagination and artistry. So about artful discovery, not to say this is a different kind of discovery, but oh no, discovery is artistry, and artistry is discovery too. So I guess I wonder about that because I do hear a lot of well-intentioned Christians in the arts who seem to have that dichotomy, and
Mm.
it bothers me. I just think it's not helpful, and I feel as if it's not true to the doctrine of creation.
Yeah.
So I think that the doctrine of creation makes ordinary things absolutely astounding. And if you happen to forget it, the doctrine of the incarnation comes along and confirms it. So yes, the Lord is wonderful and things point to him, but they're not like mundane and ordinary apart from that.
Yeah.
They already absolutely fantastic as ordinary creatures, created beings. And to me as an artist, not I mean, if I were an artist, let me say that, well, obviously I'm a writer. It's the stuff, that I absolutely love, and then you add to it the what if, what if I could take Legos and build them into cracks in the city sidewalks. I'm just thinking of something I saw on, it's
Yeah.
if, could do this, and it's like you're just enchanted already with the ordinary stuff and then with the little vision, which is the near and the far from to subsidiary focal integration, but then opens up worlds. But the worlds are not, they don't have to be somehow behind this one. They're in it. They're in it. And so yes, there's
Yeah.
all this alone to the Lord. This is his world. I mean, if you were God and you were gonna disclose it yourself, what would you do? You might make a world.
Yeah. You don't need fairies at the bottom of the garden for the garden to be wonderful. The sort of
Magic.
the butterflies, the flowers, all of these things are full of wonder in and of themselves. Yeah. I think
Right. Yeah.
I very much appreciate like Tolkien and Lewis and that mythopoetic tradition. But I think, yeah, it's possible sometimes for Christians to get stuck on it in a way that it's not having that integrated sense of wonder in the everyday, as well as it's wonderful to be able to tell fantastic stories of elves and giants and dragons and so on. I love all that. But I think fantasy is at its best when it's allowing us to see the ordinary world with fresh eyes. And I think that's what Tolkien and Lewis were aiming for, is a renewal of our vision to see the wonder in everyday reality. But sometimes it's possible as readers or as creative imitators to get stuck on the surface details and not see that deeper vision for reality, perhaps.
Well, thanks for saying that. That helps me. I've thought so much recently about the Inklings, and I'm, in connection with my sciatica, listening again to Lord of the Rings because I thought, a grim story to go with my pain. But I, like all the years I taught logic, which is 45 years, I had what I called logic devotions. where I would have my students read one of the essays in God and the Duck. And, I said, look, C.S. Lewis cannot not make an argument. So find the thesis and find the premises. And what, I mean, obviously those things are works of art, but what you have to see is excellent reasoning is a work of art. And he was a master. Now, compared to Tolkien, he was a philologist and a linguist. Now, is that detailed and, is it objective? I mean, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's to Tolkien what logic is to Lewis. So you've got highly technical stuff going on there. I heard something recently where, W.H. Auden was saying about how, Tolkien, got us in connection with the Anglo-Saxon in our language, Mirkwood, all the sounds of Mirkwood. I mean, this is like beyond me in linguistics and philology, but that's highly technical stuff. And what we need to see is both those guys, with respect to their disciplines, were artfully, subsidiarily indwelling their technique. Just like a pianist would, or it's like you wear it, and it's as you wear it subsidiarily that's the from that the artistry comes from, right? So the from to subsidiary focal integration makes way more sense of ordinary stuff. And then, it happens to go with knowing God too, because what do you do with the Psalms? You wear them.
Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things that I love about Lewis is he's such a master of metaphor. So even when he's making a logical argument, he does it with such imagination. It is very much that good logical writing actually is using imagination, is using metaphor. It's not two very separate things. And yeah, Lewis is an absolute master of that in terms of all of his metaphors and how he brings ideas to life so vividly.
Well, he says the Christian should say the resurrection has occurred the way I might say I saw a crocus last week. That would be an example.
Yes. I'm also reminded of his meditation in a tool shed, because that reminds me a bit of the subsidiary-focal integration, because he talks about the difference between looking at a beam of light from the outside and then looking along the beam, so you see out the crack in the tool shed to the view beyond. And he says you can't do those two ways of experiencing something and analyzing something at the same time. And perhaps that's similar a bit to the kind of do you think that connects with the sort of subsidiary and the focal?
Yeah, and see, that's helpful, Caleb, because you wouldn't say, some people would try to say, well, looking at is science and looking along is religion, but you can't see your garden.
Yeah.
Look along. See, that's the thing. I mean, it's ordinary knowing that is looking along. Ordinary knowing. Of course, it's religious knowing too, but it's because religious knowing is knowing. So in other words, we as human persons are already created to know from to subsidiary focal. We're meant to look along. And yes, it's dumb to look at if you expect to want to see it. Sometimes you have to. It's called destructive analysis. That's how you learn your Hebrew vocabulary or whatever it is. You got to fixate on it at the beginning, but don't take looking at as your epistemic paradigm. Because the epistemic paradigm for any old knowing is looking along.
Yeah. Someone else I've been reading recently who I think is doing some interesting similar thing is Iain McGilchrist. So I'm working my way through his book, The Matter with Things, which is really big and dense, and it's fascinating, but there's a lot to get through. but he's very much, I think, addressing the same problem of a sort of reductive modernist outlook. And his analysis is in terms of brain hemispheres. So he talks about the left hemispheres being the kind of attending to the details, controlling, manipulating things. And then the right hemisphere is the creative, seeing wholes rather than parts. And he goes into lots of studies which he says underpins the kind of way each half of the brain is, each hemisphere is specialized in one or the other. He says that you always need both working together, but the sort of mistake modernity has made is to focus on a very left-brained way of thinking and to see that as sufficient in and of itself. So I think he's then trying to say that it's always got to bring the two together. You need that in Polanyi's terms, that focal integration, not just the breaking down into parts. Is that something you've engaged with at all? Do you think that looking at it in terms of neuroscience and brain hemispheres is a helpful addition into these kinds of conversations?
Thank you for asking. I'm a little, I guess I'm not enamored of that approach. Polanyi himself talks about mind and body as from two. But, it doesn't help me to know how my brain works. It does help me to know how knowing works. And, you hear about left brain and right brain, you forget that the goal is integration, and the Polanyi gives it to you that how you do it is from two. So what you need to see in modernity is, yes, it may be left-brained, but if you've got an epistemic paradigm of information, that's myopia. It blinds you to reality. And you can come out of the kind of the left brain, right thing with yet another dichotomy. And so what you need is an approach that torpedoes all the dichotomies, and that's what you have in subsidiary-focal integration. So people can read that and say, well, there's two kinds of knowing. No, there's one kind of knowing. There's one kind of knowing, and it's from two creative subsidiary-focal integration. And so that's how you're meant to put it together. You want to know how. I mean, you want to see it. Just watch any sports activity, right? It's happening, right? Just watch any piano performance. Watch how you make an omelet. I mean, it's happening all the time. You don't have to have studied neuron firings to make an omelet. You do have to be doing subsidiary focal integration.
Yeah, I do. I do think McGilchrist's project is an integration project. I don't think he's trying to make those into an absolute dichotomy. I think it echoes a lot of what you said in that he would say that, yeah, actually, it is actually always both these things. It's just we fool ourselves into thinking there's not that you can get by with just the left brain analytical thing by itself, but in fact there's always also the other thing.
Utter the word subsidiary, and that's what I need to know is what it means to attend from, right? And how you play that out in your game, right? I don't need, and the point, yes, agrees with integration. That's good. That's good. And it's good to point out that, yeah, you're using half your brain if you're going to say that knowledge is, is information. But when you're actually doing something, you've got this from two thing going on, and that's cool. By the way, I reread, getting ready for this, your piece that you wrote recently on McGilchrist and Lewis. And I felt that you too said, there's some stuff in Lewis. Right. But one thing picked up listening or reading that was that he thought that verification was left brain. And that's exactly what Polanyi disagrees with. It's highly creative. Critical verification is just as creative as scientific discovery. And I would say, again, back to the logic, what made Lewis the incredible person, in his, mission in life was his utter creativity in logic. He was a master. And
Yeah.
you tend to think, well, logic isn't creative. Oh, just read C.S. Lewis, right? Right? Just like you might say, well, philology isn't creative. Well, go read Tolkien. you know.
And on the other side of
So
things, a great example of a nation in terms of scientific discovery is Einstein, because he used all these thought experiments in terms of discovering relativity. He thought, oh, what would happen if I was sitting on top of a beam of light and going at the speed of light? And what if you did this and so on? And so there was very much, he was drawing on his imagination, and that was very much part of his discovery process, was to explore these ideas. And it wasn't separate from his genius in then terms of being able to do the mathematics and link it with all these observations and so on. It was very much, the creativity and discovery being part of the same process.
well, my understanding from Polanyi is Einstein didn't come up with the discovery on the basis of experiments.
Yeah. It was imaginative first, and then it's, let's see if this, I think there's that sort of discovery and insight that comes imaginatively, and there might be a process that's more methodical that follows of verifying.
Right.
And that's
But
perhaps where
even
you can draw a distinction then between a more insightful aha moment and a more methodical, okay, let's do all of the observations that back this up, but it's driven by some insight.
You have to you have to determine what sort of experiment is going to validate it. And that's highly personed too, right?
Yeah.
So Polanyi, directed a research center. He's one of the, what he was very elitist. He said, there's only a handful of research centers in the world that produce Nobel Prize winners. But what would happen is he'd have an idea, and then the people that were working in the lab, it would take them 2 years to just build the equipment to test it the way that they had decided needed to be tested. The whole lab was not aligned with the knowledge as information epistemology, which was his point. Look, scientific discovery happens. What's more, the testing is artful too.
Yes, yeah.
Which I think science gets a bad rap. And that's part of the problem with Lewis is, we think Lewis is a wonderful inkling, which he is, right? An amazing inkling. But oh my goodness, he uses reason. Well, and reason has a bad rap, right? I'm here to say I think reason is creative. And I think there's one kind of knowing. And so what he is doing is subsidiarily wearing his logic learning so that he could create from it. To come up with a middle term is magic. All men are born. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. To realize that Socrates is a man, that's the common one we're used to, but it's that middle term. And to have identified it opens worlds.
Yeah. Lewis talked about imagination is the organ of meaning and reason is the organ of truth. And so imagination...
I don't want to divorce those.
Yeah, but it's not divorcing them, but it means that imagination underpins all knowing, because in order to be able to believe something as either true or false, you first need to understand it. You need to grasp it imaginatively. Until you've done that, you've got no basis for being able to make a rational judgment in terms of whether it's true or false. the act of comprehending it imaginatively is an integral part of that process, I think. So I think, I think what we're wrestling with is how to distinguish two aspects of something that is perhaps one thing or is an inseparably woven thing. And I think there are some meaningful distinctions that can be drawn, but you don't want to pull them apart in any kind of dichotomy. So I think, how to speak well in terms of helpful
Yeah.
distinctions without
Yeah.
divorcing things
I
is the
guess
tricky.
I find that one unhelpful. I just think
Mm,
the kind of subsidiary scrabbling, anticipative from scrabbling in seeking a vision that you half grasp by intuition, that's equally, yes, it's imaginative, but it's also the stuff of reason.
yeah.
And, and, and so, but here's one thing that maybe would be a place that the distinction might happen. When I gave a paper in Cambridge, I talked about this somewhat. Polanyi's idea of the premises of science. This is a cool idea. This is in personal knowledge. If you're going to make a discovery, you somehow in anticipation of it, your sense of rationality has to shift to a further world. If you don't change what he calls the presumptions or the premises of science, you'll never make the discovery. So what happens is you learn to indwell what you can't name it yet. It's anticipative reason. You haven't named it, and you can't even identify it until the aha moment of the discovery. Best example of this is the disciples on the road to Emmaus, who,
mm,
they say later, did not our hearts burn within us when he talked with us on the way, right? So they can make no sense rationally of this young rabbi who's saying to them, bless me, didn't you read the scriptures? It does not add up, but their body is burning.
yeah,
So they're out in front of themselves. And what they're doing is their body is adjusting to this further world where the premises of science are different and where dead men do rise again if they happen to be God. Right? So, but in the aha moment, their eyes were open and breaking the bread, that's when they see how reality is. But
yeah,
if they had surrendered the one that they were living from and somehow started anticipating the premises of science, they would have never come to the discovery. Polanyi
yeah.
says that all discovery.
I think one of the reasons I'm so interested in imagination is that I do think it plays it's integrating role. And I think it's one of these things where it's at once rational, but it's also embodied, because imagination is very much concerned with bringing something to life, putting flesh on the bones of something. It's not a bare concept, but something with taste, with tangibility. So I think, and actually we need that for any kind of thought. So I do think it's really helpful to have that integral understanding. I think imagination very much sits at the heart of however you might distinguish will and emotions and intellect. Imagination kind of ties all of that together. It's the sort of, I don't know, maybe it's the hub at the center of the wheel between things that you can talk about separately, but you can't really pull apart in any actual sense.
May I ask you 2 questions?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So one is, give me an example. And the other is say a little bit more of what you have in mind when you say imaginative discipleship.
Yeah. So I think, let's see, an example might be, so particularly in terms of discipleship, Tozer said that what you think about when you think of God is the most important thing about you. So an example of that would be is, how do you imagine God? And actually, whether you think of God in terms of, like, obviously the idea of God as Father is really important, but then we're bringing in all sorts of associations of our own experiences of fatherhood, good and bad. So I think I'd see part of the process of imaginative discipleship is refining our imagination when it comes to God, so that we're pulling in good, we're enriching ourselves with good experiences and images of fatherhood, both from encountering people who model that well, but also from stories and poems and artwork that can flesh that out and that bring to life in a more three-dimensional way the reality of that in a way that's concrete to us. So that's a reality to us. And then I think that then that's bringing us into deeper communion with God as Father. We're then better able to encounter him as Father when we do that. So I'd see imaginative discipleship in terms of being attentive to the images we have and cultivating healthy imagination around spiritual things that can then help us move in a healthy direction in terms of our emotion, our believing, our doing. So that's that. Yeah, that's one example, I think. Does that help?
Yeah. And then a third question is there anything from Doorway to Artistry that we haven't addressed that stuck out as something for you?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot in there, so I'm sure I will think of more things where I'm like, oh, I should have mentioned that. I think in terms of that, cultivating the right kind of attention, just practically, are there particular things that you do in your life, in your spirituality, in your day to day that help you cultivate that attentiveness to the lively real? How do you
Right.
think, what can the listeners go away, and if there's one or two things they can try that might help do that, what could I do that would, on my walks up the hill, maybe to enjoy the hills, how can I better connect with the real?
Well, oh, there's so much to say there. I do feel that in Doorway to Artistry, as I was thinking about how to write that, I felt like it was going to take a conversion, and it did. And I am in a different place now. I must say, but in chapter 2, in the Hearth chapter, I talk about composing, consenting to come to attentive presence, and so the role of consent or resolve and then attentiveness. So like when I invite you hospitably and welcome you into my home, then you have to reciprocate politely, right? And you compose yourself to attend to what's going on, so you would do that in your walk up the hill too. And so whatever it is attends you, cultivates that resolve to be actually related to that. I'll say here's something that's been going on with me and C.S. Lewis. Last spring I was in Oxford, and then last fall in our bookstore here, I found a publication of his 5 years of diary when he was in his 20s, which I picked up to read because those were the streets I'd walked on when I was in Oxford. But then I thought, well, this is interesting. The great C.S. Lewis wrote a diary for only 5 years of his life, and I've never thought of myself as a diary writer. But maybe every day, when I read a little of C.S. Lewis's diary, maybe I'll try to write a few pages of my own. Well, writers know to take the the fountain pen and put it on the paper, and then write it. And if you read Lewis's diary, his his diary of the walk up the hill, he's feeling the atmospheric whatever, and he's looking for the flowers, and he's looking for joy, and this is all pre-Christianity, you know. But I thought, oh, I want to write words like that. And so I think lots of people would say, well, just taking pen to paper helps you be attentive on your walk up the hill.
Yeah.
Those are just some thoughts.
Lovely. Thank you. Yes. No, I think it's wonderful how these things all connect. Yeah, I think the artistry, the act of artistry helps us with that connection. Yeah, it's a way of paying attention to reality, of attending to it. Thank you. There's so much in there. So I would recommend to everyone listening to check out the books. Thank you.
Can I say one more thing? I have a
Sure.
new book coming out in the fall.
Oh,
that
exciting.
It grows out of Doorway to Artistry. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in Doorway to Artistry about the mother's smile.
Oh,
And
yes. Yeah.
that's the name of the new book. So, and the subtitle is Philosophical Formation in the Welcome of Mothers and Friends. So it'll be just a little book, but comes out of Doorway to Artistry.
I loved hearing you talking about the Mother's Smile at L'Abri Fellowship last year. So I look forward to that book. My wife, Beverly, it made so much intuitive sense to her as a mother. Yes.
That's great. Great.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that will help us in our quest to connect with reality and for knowledge, both in a specifically Christian context as disciples, but also just in our engagement with the world. It is full of wonder. And yeah, your book is a wonderful invitation to connect with that in a deeper way. Thank you.
I hope I see you again soon.
So just as a bit of a concluding reflection, I found that a really fascinating conversation. But the thing I was struck by playing it back was the affinity I see between Iain McGilchrist's idea of the different brain hemispheres and the ideas that Esther Meek's drawing on in terms of subsidiary-focal integration from Polanyi. Now, it seems to me that McGilchrist, who is a very influential thinker at the moment, and Meek are circling the same problem, that of a very reductive materialism, one that leaves us with a divided sense of knowing rather than an integrated one. And I'm going to use Aristotle's 4 causes to break down how I think they're talking about the same thing, but at different levels in a way that's perhaps complementary. Now, if you're a trained philosopher, please do let me know if I've got these categories wrong. But it seems to me that McGilchrist is concerned with the material cause in terms of the neurobiology, the neuroscience of what's happening in the brain when we know things. And he talks about how it's the left brain that breaks things down, that's analytical, and it's the right brain that sort of sends it out as its emissary. The Master and the Emissary is his book about this, and how it has to bring back its analysis for the right-hand side of the brain to integrate. And this seems to fit really well with the whole idea of subsidiary-focal integration. It seems to be describing what's going on with that at a neuroscientific level. But so that's talking about the material cause. Whereas I think Meek and Polanyi, their analysis is more about what is knowledge, what is the formal cause. And Meek is saying that knowledge is a participatory process. It's covenantal, it's relational, it's attentive knowing, it's clue integrating, artful knowing. And so I think that's very similar to the kind of direction that McGilchrist pushes things in. But I think Esther Meek's really fleshing that out and pushing that on the formal level of causation much more coherently and robustly. Now, McGilchrist is very interested in terms of efficient cause, of what's happened to our culture to get us to the place where we've got this left brain, right brain split, where we've got this reductive materialism. And so a lot of his analysis is focused there, which Esther doesn't get into so much, but I think is mutually illuminating. But where the real difference lies is in final causation, which is what's something's purpose? Where's it going? What's it for? For Meek, the purpose of knowing is communion, communion with the real, but also ultimately communion with God as the most fundamental reality. And McGilchrist, again, he vaguely pushes in, gestures in this direction. He talks about meaning, he talks about values, he talks about beauty, even the divine, but not in confessional terms, not in traditional Christian categories at all. He leaves that much more vague and open-ended. Now, maybe that's where you're at, and you are more inclined to want a more vague sense of knowledge driving us to communion with something spiritual in the broad sense. But for myself, I would align with Esther Meek in seeing the aim of knowledge as finding its ultimate fulfillment, its ultimate rest in communion with God himself. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. It certainly gave me plenty of food for thought. Let me know what you thought. Leave a comment or review. Drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you as we seek to engage better with the real and pursue true knowledge. Thanks for listening.